This is your Interstate on the Interstate.
Hello, welcome back. Today, this episode is all about projection. So, what is projection? Well, Freud is the psychologist who's attributed with the term projection. It happened because he was writing about a particular patient who was trying to avoid really looking at her feelings of shame by projecting that her neighbors were actually gossiping about her instead. Basically, if you don't deal with your internal problems, then you're going to see it externally around you. And so that was one of the first cases that it was written about. The thing with projection is that we're doing it all the time and we're not usually aware of it. And it can come up in all sorts of situations and relationships through work relationships, family relationships, romantic relationships, etc. And we just project so much without even realizing it. So by the end of this, we'll have gone a little bit deeper about the concept, and I'm going to give you a lot of examples and stories that I've come across so far in life and give you some tools to be able to bring awareness and then also to be able to let go of whatever it is that you're holding on to. So in more modern times, the concept of projection is actually associated as being something negative, like you hear in a lot of more mindful or spiritual communities where people are often saying, "You're projecting." And the funny thing is that the person saying you're projecting is projecting too. And so whenever we're trying to bring awareness to somebody else, we actually need to bring it back to ourselves. And we are projecting everywhere all the time. Something that has stuck with me is this idea that when you're pointing your finger at someone, realize that there are actually 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. So anytime that you're blaming somebody for anything, even if a person has done something, the feeling of blame is actually a projection of something that you're feeling inside. And it might not be direct, but it is reflecting something that you haven't brought to awareness that has been pushed into your subconscious or unconscious mind. And one of the early lessons in A Course in Miracles in the workbook is that I give everything the meaning that it has for me, which implies that actually everything is neutral. Everything that's happening, everything that's being said, it's all neutral. All the objects around us, all the people around us, it's actually all neutral. But we impose so much of our own experience and our assumptions that we don't really see things objectively. And the judgments that we impose onto things is really just a reflection of our own judgments in our own minds. And also the program that we have from our past or that we've been carrying on a genetic level or ancestral level, things that we might not even be consciously aware that we're holding on to. So instead of just thinking that projection is something that's negative, I want to turn it around and see how it can be something that's actually constructive. How can we see ourselves through everything that's around us? And in a way, it's actually really amazing if you think about the fact that we have over 7 billion mirrors in our lives to show us all of the judgments that we're holding on to or to show us all of the love that we have. And knowing that everyone around us and everything around us is reflecting us, we have the option to choose. Do we want to hold on to judgments and feel the judgment for ourselves? Or do we want to see love in others and see that for ourselves too? And recognizing that these are all just a lot of projections, how can we use that as a tool? So I'm going to give just a recent example that I've had, which can show how projection and taking consciousness of the fact that we're projecting can be used in a constructive way. So my example is a recent situation that came up with my partner. So he's been really busy working full time and also busy studying and other activities on top of that. And we are currently far away from each other during this quarantine period. And I noticed that when we talk on the phone, I'd get frustrated that the only time that he seemed to have to communicate with me was when he was doing something else, like while he was washing dishes, while he was making food, or whatever he was doing. And I had this expectation or idea that he'd give me 100% of his attention. And it made me upset when he was banging around those dishes, and it just irritated me so much. And so I perceived that it was him that was making me upset, that it was the loud pans and the footsteps, and that it was his fault, that he was doing something, and that was the cause of my upset. I noticed that this was a recurring pattern. Like there were a few days in a row where we'd spoken where I would get really annoyed at the microphone, the dishes, or him. And I started to see that there was a pattern, and that the pattern wasn't about the outside, what was external, but the pattern was how I was feeling, which was upset. And so I could recognize that I was the common denominator in all of those situations. And I took a pause and I looked to see within myself, what was I really upset about? And it went to feeling that I wasn't being 100% paid attention to. I wasn't being appreciated 100%, or that I wasn't worth taking the extra time to just have a conversation with just me. And I brought all of those statements back to myself and realized that my judgment of him was actually reflecting myself. So I could see how I hadn't been taking the time for myself. I haven't been giving myself 100% full attention. I haven't been feeling that own worthiness within myself that I was worth taking the time for. And how that showed up for me was that I would multitask. At that point in time, I wouldn't just do one activity that was just for me. I would be watching to or listening to something in the background while I was doing something else. Instead of just journaling, I was also listening to something. Basically, I was getting frustrated at him, but really, those were things that I could have done for myself, by myself, with myself. So once I could recognize that annoyance and frustration was being reflected through him, I realized that I could give myself that space to meditate, to write in my journal, and to be fully heard by myself. So instead of multitasking and putting the responsibility on him, I brought it back to myself. And then in the moment that I took responsibility for myself, not expecting him to change, but changing that within myself, then guess what? The whole problem was gone. I firstly was empowered to choose again, to hear myself fully. And I gave myself the space, like I had talked about in the previous episode about giving space for yourself. And that was just a signal that I needed to take that time for myself. So I gave myself more love, more care, more attention. And guess what? In subsequent conversations with him, it wasn't as noisy. He actually did take time to listen to me. And so it wasn't about waiting for him to change, but changing myself first. So we can use this projection concept as a tool, and we can ask ourselves, how are we projecting, and bring the responsibility back to ourselves. It's also recognizing, why do we project? Why would that mechanism exist at all? And projection, in a way, is how we protect ourselves. So our subconscious mind, it either is too overwhelmed with a particular feeling, like say the example with Freud, that feeling of shame was too much to deal with, so then she ended up projecting it outwards into other people. really our unconscious mind is trying to avoid feeling bad, feeling guilty. And if we don't take consciousness of what is happening underneath the surface for ourselves, those projections will just keep happening. And actually, what tends to happen, what I've noticed, is that the projections get stronger and bigger until we do actually deal with it. And when I've done different healing sessions with people, that's often the case, is the topic that we start with or that we're working with is usually a situation of that person with some external experience that they are having. But it takes us to looking at what beliefs or what things and emotions that person is actually holding on within that they haven't dealt with yet. So you can actually look at this for yourself and see what is causing you the most pain, the biggest upset in your life around you. And that can be the way to look inside of you. So you can ask yourself, how might that situation or that upset be reflecting something within you, directly or indirectly? So one way you can do that is just throughout the day, you can just jot the things that are making you upset. And I mean, even the small upsets, the way that a person said something or the little things that bother you are actually not very different from the big things that bother you. For myself, when I do that jotting down of the things that have bothered me, when I am ready to delve more deeply, I'll take that time to look at those things and to see how my taking responsibility can actually create shifts. So how do you take responsibility and make those shifts? Well, I'm going to explain one of the tools that I use. So Ho'oponopono is something that I learned from Dr. Hugh Lin and Dr. Joe Vitale. And Dr. Hugh Lin has this amazing story where he was working at Hawaii State Hospital and he cured every single person in the criminally insane ward at that hospital without ever seeing a single patient. And what he did was he got himself an office in the hospital and he just looked at the patient's files. And in the process of looking at the files, he did his own inner work and he applied Ho'oponopono. And after, I believe it was 4 years, all of the patients were healed. And it wasn't just the patients, but the staff as well. Apparently, there was a really high turnover rate, and it was hard to keep the staff working there because it was such a shitty place to work. But by the end, they all actually enjoyed it. I haven't met him in person, but know people who have, and it's powerful stuff. So a lot of people know Ho'oponopono as just these phrases of, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And that is part of it, but it's so much deeper, so much more profound than that. The main thing is this realizing that you can take responsibility for everything that you're witnessing. So if you see it, you can clear it in your mind. And because we are all connected, because we have the ability to change things in the world by changing ourselves, all of the psychoses, all of the problems, all the judgments from the staff was gone through him. And we have that same ability as well. We can recognize that we have that same capacity to take responsibility for our projections that we see in others. And do not underestimate how powerful it can be to bring back projections into your own mind. Dr. Hugh Lin, he talks about a lot of different cleaning tools, as he calls it, that you can use in order to clear your mind from holding on to the data, the information, because it's not really personal. It's just information that we carry, that we have carried from some other time in our lives, our past lives, or our ancestors' lives, which we just need to let go of. And we're going to actually practice this in a little bit using those 4 phrases that I had mentioned before. But I also want to share a story which reminds me so much of what Dr. Hugh Lin was able to achieve. And that is the CPDRC, which is a prison in Cebu, Philippines. So over 10 years ago, I was in the Philippines visiting some family, as my mom is from Cebu. And I went with a friend to visit the dancing inmates. And They had gone viral on YouTube for their choreographed dances, which they did, and their bright orange jumpsuits. And I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, but you could just do a quick Google search if you want to see it. And at that time, they had shows that were open to the public every Saturday, and I went to visit. I ended up meeting the warden who had the inspiration, and I actually interviewed him. So it was really fascinating to learn firsthand from him and from some of the inmates about the experience of the transformation. It reminds me a lot of the story of Hulen in that it was really notorious. This prison was known for violence. No one wanted to work there, obviously, and he was actually left in charge of it almost as punishment because his sister was, I think still is, governor of Cebu. And so it was kind of what she thought was a punishment for him because no one wanted to take on that job, but he ended up doing it. And he had a sort of Shawshank Redemption moment of inspiration. If you know the scene from that movie where Tim Robbins or Andy Dufresne locks himself in the warden's office and plays this record on the PA, and it's like the humanity of all the inmates are awoken just for that period of time, but it really does something. It's like this little small act of rebellion, but it's actually just bringing back a little bit of the soul into their hearts, even if it was for a second. And he did a similar thing of awakening the humanity in the prisoners in Cebu, but he ended up doing it through dance and had a choreographer come, and it was actually through dance and coming back alive that brought the whole place to rehabilitation. On the surface level, it looks like it's just through dance and the exercise that had the transformation, but it was so much more than just learning a choreographed dance. It gave the inmates a purpose, but even more than that, it was actually that he made a choice not to see the prisoners as bad or guilty people. He actually chose to see them as human, as people, like no different from people that are outside of prison. And I remember when I was walking through the prison with him, through the yard where they were playing basketball, and it didn't even occur to me that I should need security. You know, it was a really extremely violent place, and it turned around completely to be as a place that had zero incidences of violence. That's how safe it felt. And so I ended up talking to him a lot about the shadow side, and that the reason that the prisoners exist is because we as a society are afraid that we could be murderers, that we could do bad things. And so we better lock that shit up. But he really revealed the depth that he didn't necessarily share with everybody because not everybody was really open to hearing these concepts. He told me the importance of seeing the prisoners through innocent eyes, and that is a huge part of real rehabilitation. He wasn't holding on to the idea that he was better than prisoners. When he walked around the prison, they were him. They were his brothers. They loved him, and they really showed that, you know, with hugs. And they talked to me, and they just said that they knew, they could feel that he had zero judgment of whatever crimes they had committed in the past. This concept in general, I think, is really important to look at, which is the shadow side. Prisons and mental hospitals, these are places where we as a whole don't want to look at, and we don't want to face, and we don't accept as part of ourselves. It's so much easier to lock that up and don't look at it. And honestly, this doesn't really help us in the long run. We can all benefit from looking at the shadow side of ourselves, because if we can liberate our minds from the judgments that we have towards others, we liberate not just ourselves as individuals, but ourselves as a whole. And so you don't have to put yourself in a maximum security prison to explore the shadow sides. You can actually see the shadows playing out in your daily life experiences. So let's talk about how we can bring this into our regular, in quotes, daily lives. So In each episode, we have done a short 1-minute meditation and reflection, and we are going to do that this episode, but first we're going to do a little explanation. So we are going to allow ourselves to look at all the upsets that we have had today or recently. And as each one comes up, we're going to look at how we can bring that back to our own minds. And we're going to take responsibility for that coming from ourselves. Taking responsibility doesn't mean you have to feel bad, doesn't mean you have to feel guilty. It just means that you can accept that you have a part in playing a role in that situation. And, if you keep pretending that it's someone else, then you become the victim and you're unable to change them. You're powerless. And if you can take responsibility by bringing that projection back to your own mind, then you have the ability to choose again. And so the way we're going to approach these projections, these upsets, is by using one of the Ho'oponopono tools, which is to simply say the 4 phrases: I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. Dr. Hugh Len sometimes, as a shortcut, just uses one of those phrases, like thank you. And sometimes when I'm practicing it, I'll just say one of those statements. It doesn't have to be all of it. The idea is that you have the intention of accepting it and facing it head on. In this 1 minute, we're going to look at all the upsets. And as you see each one or think of each scenario, just repeat those 4 phrases, or if it's easier for you, just pick one. Just say, I'm sorry, or just say, thank you, whatever feels better for you, knowing that either way works. And so, all right, let's go ahead and do this. Allow yourself to get in a position that's comfortable. Take your few deep breaths. Allowing yourself to be really present. Think of the mantra, think of the phrase or phrases that you're going to repeat, and allow yourself to think of all the upsets from your day and to say those phrases aloud or in your head. And 1 minute begins now. Okay, so there you have it. There's a simple tool you can use throughout your day. Honestly, this topic of projection is a big one. So the next episode is probably going to be an extension of this, because I think we're going to go a little more in depth about this. So I hope that you can start to approach the things in your life as something that's reflecting your own mind. And instead of blame, instead of pointing the finger, you can bring it back to yourself. Take a pause. Do whatever you need to remember that you can take responsibility for whatever is happening. You can apply it to daily life scenarios. You can apply it to big world change scenarios, anything. So thank you so much for joining me today. And don't forget to leave a review, subscribe, and share with someone who you think might want to hear this. And until next time, bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Interstate on the Interstate. For more information, visit yourinnerstate.love.
It's falling too. Wind on your face now.